So, welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business Podcast. With me today, I have Jan Jensen of Cxense. Hi, Jan. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, Adrian. How are you?
I'm very well. Now, some of you who are avid listeners and readers of this kind of podcast, I don't know if you number of that many, but some of you may remember that we've had Jan on the podcast before when he wasn't at Cxense, but he was across at Trustpilot. But he's doing some cool stuff at Cxense, and he's here today to tell us a little bit about that and tell us a bit more, so we can talk a little bit more about marketing and personalization and customer experience, etc., etc. But so, for the benefit of those people that haven't heard you before, Jan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about the work that you do?
Yeah, sure. So mostly I've worked the last 15 years in high-tech marketing, and mostly 90% around the marketing, the MarTech stack and ad tech.
Yeah.
And specifically, I work in branding, customer centricity, and culture. So what I do is help high-tech companies grow culture and market exposure. And right now, as you mentioned, I work at Cxense, and I'm helping them go to market. They specialize in delivering highly impactful data management and personalization solutions.
Right. Perfect. Now, you mentioned there, personalization. That's a really hot topic. It's something that everybody's is like sort of craving to try and achieve. They want to deliver these personalized experiences, and research and feedback is suggesting that that's what customers kind of want. But we talked a little bit earlier, and you say that you believe that marketeers are really struggling to provide consumers with this personalized kind of content and a personalized experience. Why do you think they're struggling with that in your experience?
Yeah, first of all, it's a good question, and there's a few answers to that. I have 3 or 4 things I think that marketers are struggling with. First of all, it's a very crowded space, and it's kind of melting together, the MarTech, ad tech space.
Yeah.
And it's very lucrative. So when you look at it, many vendors that might not even have a holistic solution kind of crowd in on that space. So it's a very immature open market as we see it.
Mm-hmm.
But, if you talk about challenges, what they're struggling with, I would say, first of all, to bring together a 360 view of customers and prospects requires really a lot of cross-functional alignment.
Yeah.
And unifying the data layer.
Right.
Now, considering today, when you look at sales and marketing, they're in fact struggling with bringing the marketing automation, Salesforce automation systems online and aligning around that.
Uh-huh.
And now to get alignment around a more holistic view of that and going much deeper with the data and the processes across multiple functions, of course, is a hard thing to do.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't mean it's too complicated. It just means marketing leaders need to put much more focus into driving this next generation of marketing tools, getting the data layer right, so you in fact deliver much deeper experiences.
Right. Just on that, do you think that there's a danger that you talked about getting the sort of the sales and the marketing kind of automation thing kind of going, but then also kind of adding the personalization layer, which requires alignment and cross-functional collaboration and the kind of getting all the data kind of together. Is there a danger that marketeers and other sort of executives in firms, there's potentially that they've got too much kind of going on and they need to just do one thing at a time?
Yeah, of course there is. The gap is getting very big for the companies that haven't even started on wave 1, marketing automation, Salesforce, building, the operational readiness in the background so you can do effective marketing.
Yeah.
So, of course, the leap from there up to where we're going the next couple of years will be harder. So it's always been the same. Start simple, start now, don't wait, and start of that journey. But I think, so yes, it has gotten complicated, and of course, that's also why you start to see, or should start to see in companies, that the skill set you have on board is much more analytical and operational, of course, than it was 5 years ago. We all know this, but when I talk to fellow marketeers and look at their org chart, it's surprisingly thin on analytical people and more full of list busters, I would say.
Right.
And a second reason why I think marketers struggle is, the production of content. And this goes back to understanding your audience.
Right.
I know it sounds weird to talk about, understanding your audience. It's the very core of modern marketing. But more and more, so content needs to be very unique and personalized, and it needs to be, accessed or applied across all touch points. So really understanding the audience interests, grievances, challenges, combined with the content and that being creative, and you need to be analytic about how it's used, is key for the future. If you don't understand your audience and the content available, how can you make a personalized experience? And that's just hard to do because it costs a lot of money and it costs a lot of time understanding what's happening with the content, what's the most used, what's the most read, what's the most forwarded. But being on top of all of those things is super important.
So you've just created a soup of complexity there. I mean, you've blended analytics or analytical skills with kind of creativity, and then with empathy and understanding to be able to actually to really get to an idea where you can, I guess, you can envision the sort of relationship that you want to have with your customer, the sort of content that you needed to create that would help you sort of bridge that or facilitate that relationship, and then you've got to stuff all that into a marketing department. I mean, that I can see kind of why many firms might be struggling kind of with that. But is that also the reason why we end up getting, because I see a lot of the stuff that gets produced by many kind of firms, and it's like I just look at it and just go, it's just boring. It's just some of the stuff is horrible. And is that a function of because the challenge is so great? I mean, because they need this big blend of skills, this kind of analytics and creativity and empathy and things, that actually because people struggle so much with it, that you just end up creating a lot of vanilla content?
Yeah, I mean, the stuff you're referring to, the content without content, is a big issue. I mean, the first wave of inbound marketing and modern marketing, as I would say, was always like top of the funnel stuff. So meaning, what just attract people. And that's like kind of leaflets and teasers and stuff like that. And some companies have taken that too far, that they forget that it's okay to use that as a teaser, but it's not okay for using that as a thought leader. You need to have better explanations of, what's the best practices, how do you start, So I think you'll see much more deeper content as we start to into the next wave of inbound.
Okay, but that requires. But then we start getting into this whole the skills that the firms need, that sort of range: analytics, creativity, empathy, understanding, etc., etc. But then, in order to do that, and I guess this is where yourselves can come into play. There's a data element to this, and the data about the kind of customer, and then we start mentioning about data, but then we get into privacy and things. And so, what's your view on sort of personalization and an increased level of personalization and data and privacy? Because it's almost like we're stirring up so many issues when you get here. And I am sometimes wonder, customers say they want it, but do they really want it when you start throwing in data and privacy?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely see, no matter where you look, in no matter which report lately, is that, and I know this from Trustpilot, where we did a lot of surveying with the consumers, that is, they are very, very willing to share their data.
Right.
Actually, surprisingly so.
Right, okay.
But the thing that they are very keen on is to know two things. One, to feel that they get a greater experience by exchanging this data. So they will be, if they exchange their data and give a lot of information, if you then don't use it in a personalized way, they'll opt out.
Right.
And the second thing I would say about it is, on the privacy side, you need to be very thoughtful about privacy and transparency. I think brands that have big transparency and that show, hey, here's how, even showing here's how a cookie works, here's how we gather it, here's what we use it for, here's how we track your devices, and this is what you get for it. And thanks a lot for sharing, and our responsibility is to give you a deeper more useful experience.
Yeah.
And I think that will come into itself, and you will start to see much more willingness to share, of course, with the brands that treat the data in the right way. To be able to do that, however, does mean that you have to get a good grip with the data layer. You have to understand in detail where the data came from. You have to integrate to maybe other customers' data, maybe to third-party data you buy,
right,
and integrate with your own data from the CFA system to be able to give them a great experience, but also notice where that data eventually came from and make sure you don't, go over the limits. And I think if you look at other marketing tools like retargeting, it's funny how creepy that's become.
Yeah.
And I remember using it, a little bit at Trustpilot and saying to everybody in my team, hey, let's use it, but let's be super careful.
Yeah.
Because it's that creepy feeling of, wow, first time is like, somebody is sending me content and I'm on a different website that's very relevant. But if it keeps you get into stalker mode. So again, is that what you want? Well, maybe it's more thoughtful just to send people an email saying, hey, I saw you were interested in these things. Maybe you want to check them out later instead of using retargeting.
Okay.
But all in all, it's about the data layer. The fact that if you have a great data layer and you have transparency around it, the end user will engage much more with you for sure.
Yeah. See, I really like the idea of something you mentioned just then. I really like the idea of somebody almost doing an explainer sort of video around their policy around data, where you have somebody who goes, hey, this is your data, this is your kind of privacy, we respect kind of both of them, this is how we collect things, here's a cookie and it goes here, and this is what we collect, and this is what we do with it, and this is how it helps us, and this is the promise we make to us, because that feels a real, rather than something that's wrapped up in terms and conditions and legal jargon, that feels like a really very kind of human and very respectful way to address something which some people can feel very sensitive about.
Yeah, it's almost like now that we're going voting here soon on Thursday, we talked earlier about that. I don't want to do any political stuff.
No,
Adrian, but it's almost like the NHS video that was saying, if you're in the EU, this is what you get out of hospital system, and if you're out, and they ran that simultaneously, you can almost do the same here. You can run a video where you show, if you give your information to us, this is the experience you get, and this is what happens. Yeah. And if you don't, well, guess what? We don't know if you're a male. We don't know what you like. We don't know that you want sports things. So you can almost do a comparative educational video like that would work very well for people opting in on giving information.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked a lot about this sort of personalization of data and privacy and sort of the empathy, thoughtfulness, creativity, analytics, all that sort of stuff. That's brilliant. That all for firms that are in it and wrestling with the whole thing, and for firms that are just like thinking about sort of starting it, or they're thinking about starting their journey, is it's all very well, but sometimes it doesn't feel very real unless they can get their head around a couple of examples of sort of firms or brands that are sort of doing this kind of well. I mean, in the work that you do, can you give us a couple of examples of firms, brands that you think are doing this kind of well, and what they're doing and how they're doing it in order to deliver that personalization that their customers want? Yeah,
I must say I think that there's nobody who's doing it really bad, and there's nobody who's doing it really well.
Okay.
And I do this. I know it's very vanilla, but I've been looking around at this. I think there's a few companies that actually have, a little bit of educational, where they're showing a little bit of this is what a cookie is, but
right.
Not really explained in a good way. But again, it's all about having almost a consumer rights document. This is we get the right to use your data, and you get the right to get this. And again, doing it in a very educational way. But I don't see anybody who's doing it great. But I think it's fair to say that even though personalization has been around for 10 years, it's still immature, and it's just really reaching the plateau of productivity on the height wave. So I don't think that, there's plenty of time to figure these things out. And I think we'll figure them out here in Europe first, because a lot of regulatory stuff is coming up soon too. So I think the right things will be done by the right companies for sure.
Okay. So, given if this, what do you think are the biggest kind of challenges that the firms, if they're going down this personalization kind of route, what are the biggest challenges that you think that firms need to be aware of, need to get ready for, and what would you recommend that they do when they trying to improve their personalization, manage their data, manage the privacy, manage the relationship with the customers? What are the big things they need to look out for, and what should they best do to kind of prepare for them?
Yeah, it's a good question. First I would say the one thing that we all forget. Every time I read a document, everybody talks about strategy. It's depending on the strategy. It's depending on the strategy.
Yeah.
And I would say in 9 out of 10, that's not correct. What is dependent on is the culture. And really what this means is that I can give some recommendations here that you could look at, but depending on the culture and the maturity of your company, you have to apply them the right way. So apply with sensible culture thoughts. But first thing I would say is the data layer. And I can't say this enough, that if you don't have, it doesn't matter if the whole company is doing CX. What matters is that you start with, let's just make sure that we get the right data in place. So we have the customers, the prospects, we pull in Salesforce automation data, our own data, we pull in systems from our services data, we might buy some data, and let's make sure it's all synced up and really actionable at any time we kind of need it, so instantly actionable. And to achieve this, there's a lot of alignment again going on between marketing, sales, customer service, and IT.
Yeah.
And I think this is the most important thing. And I'll give you some examples that leads a little bit into some of the use cases.
Okay.
So say that, for instance, just to visualize this, a consumer just visits a website by computer, runs out the door to catch a train, like we often do, and then 30 minutes later, everybody sits on the train on their iPhones or iPad, and then you consume more content on the same website. Now, no matter which device it is, you have to have the same user experience, the same UX.
Yeah.
We understand this. Second of all, it has to be real time, so to speak. It really means that if you 30 minutes ago consumed a piece of content, you read it, you don't want, and you didn't really like it, you didn't spend time on it, don't push that out to the iPhone again. It has to be so. If a user has been on the website, has consumed some data, didn't like it, didn't like X but likes Y, it has to be that no matter where in the company you send out a newsletter, 1 minute later, it has to reflect what they liked and what they didn't.
Right.
And this is where it starts to be, you can only do that if you have a well-architected data platform. In essence, you don't, if you have that, in essence, you don't need pre-programmed journeys, because the journeys will be built by the consumer's choice.
Yes.
And I think that, for me, is super interesting, that the marketing journeys in the future will not be something you program in Marketo or in Eloqua or any of those tools. It would be something that a well-orchestrated data layer, DMP, and the processes around it, the user will define it.
Yes. Interesting.
So, and I think that once you get to that stage, we're out of this, where a lot of marketeers are today, that they do a little bit of research on the brand personas. They put up a 30-day journey with 5 touch points, and then they leave it for a month. But a lot of things happen in that month, and personalization is all about subtleties.
Yeah.
Just like it is in an offline experience, the blink of the eye, the gut feel, the small sentences. If you want to bring that online, you need to be much more in touch with the data and the actions that happen. So, I see it as super exciting that in the future we'll know consumers' intent by their actions, and as they start to access things, they are going to create their own journey. We're not going to assume anymore what they like. Right.
And so ultimately what you're saying is, you're saying that, a lot of people are, if you're going to do anything, you've said it already, you've got to start with your data, because your data is like almost the foundation upon which you build your house.
Exactly. Exactly. And, the other thing I would recommend is that you start small. Fine with starting big, but you have to have a use case, because some of our customers, like some big publishers, well-known brands, they use it, for instance, for increased flyby, so unknown to subscribers.
Yeah.
And they're seeing conversions above 400%, just because that all of a sudden now they're starting to tease a little bit with the stuff that's paid for. They really understand deeply what people like. They're into sports. They like NASCAR. It's a male. We have lots of data on them from other sources that indicate they're also into furniture or whatever. And all of a sudden you get content that's like from the fifth click. That's very relevant.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you just get that experience, because as you mentioned before, there's so much content without context, right? Out there.
Well, there's so much stuff there's so much stuff that's just badly written or badly produced.
Yeah, and thinking of starting simple, let me just, if it's a good time, give you an example, a few examples of customers. One is, the fact that you have to start small, and there's many ways culture dictates how you skin this personalization. And I think one of them, a good example, is Winnipeg Free Press, which actually said about they needed to figure out a paid content model.
Right.
And the questions they started to ask themselves is, starting to gather all the data. They had over 300 pieces of content, lots of journalistic, really good stuff, but they just looked at it all and then tried to answer a simple question: how do you get readers to pay?
Right. Yes.
And because they've been giving it for free for so long, and now they need to go to an online model where you need to monetize. And the answer is, of course, obvious. It's to boost the value. The benefit for the reader needs to be increased, of course. So that's a little bit hard, but what they did start with was throwing a lot of content at it.
Yes.
More and more content. And to your point earlier, it turns out that it didn't change much. They were still hoovering page views around 3-4 minutes, 5 minutes max, and average page views were around 7. So they started to look at, instead, when they analyzed the data, they started to say, hey, it looks like out of 350 plus pieces of content, this group of people is only interested in this 50.
Yeah.
So what they did is they said, all right, well, let's do lowest level of personalization. Let's just show the 50 pieces of content to the reader, and let's push that out on all the channels, just derivatives of it.
Yeah.
And what happened is, each page is recommended based on a complex algorithm with balances, what they think is important, what the crowd think is important, and what an individual or a lookalike segment thinks is important. And once they did that with that 50 pieces of content, they gained just about 90% page view increase and 20% active more time on it, and really boost their numbers. And, when I talk to them, they're saying that, what they look at is, if they can get 2% increase in retention, that's pretty much the same as cutting the bottom line by 10%.
Right.
So they understand that engaging quickly users with the right kind of content, they will actually pay for it, because there's so much so what content, so what experiences out there.
Right. Okay. That's awesome. Yeah. It just is. That's kind of almost kind of one of the things that seems to be that what's kind of happening. So people are also kind of they go down this kind of track of they want personalization, but then because they work for such large organizations, they're going, we want personalization, but we want it at scale. But they forget to get the personalization kind of right, and they rush for scale, and then they almost kind of they get it wrong in the process. So everything becomes vanilla and kind of average and ordinary, because there's too much of a rush to get to scale before, like you say, starting small and getting it right, and then scaling it from there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. All of a sudden, the growth, the scale is there, and then it very much becomes top of funnel stuff. And all right, and everybody pretty much saying the same. I will say in this regard too, I think that many CMOs are too much afraid of taking risk about creating a brand that's different, that really thinking about, hey, I want to differentiate. I'm not going to do the very well proven Zendesk model, even though it's tempting to do that from a branding, voice, and tone point of view. But I'm going to try and create something very different that I think is risky, but I think people will relate to, because people relate to and like odd, different things. They're all being pressured by board members and CEOs to create deals and leads versus differentiating.
Yeah.
And I think more CMOs need to be more brave and do more about the branding side than just think about the operational lead gen side.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's great. I mean, before I ask you kind of a couple other kind of questions I want to ask you, but before I do ask you those, is there anything else that you think we've missed on this, the whole quest for personalization and data and empathy and analytics and things that you think we've missed that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think one thing that is super important is, of course, we talked a little bit about it. I want to make another jump at it. That is the skill set that you have. And I think that it's very easy to get an inbound vendor or a personalization vendor to kind of come in and say, here's the system and here is what I would do, and kind of let them lead it.
Yeah.
I think there's a real danger in that no matter what, you need to start to look at your organization and saying these days it's less and less about field marketing and more about digital, about analytics, about matching analytics with creative people to make sure you're not boring. And I think that it's much more operational even than we are today. At Trustpilot, I hired analytical and insights people, but I think, in the future, that might even be my first hires versus the second hires, because it's so important that we understand the data. It's becoming much more of a daily game than it's a weekly, monthly game of reporting and looking at numbers.
But is also there, just on that, Jan, isn't there also a danger that, so you end up with data and business outcomes, but sometimes we get there's a danger that we put the cart before the horse. In actual fact, we end up sort of getting stuck in the data, but in reality, we need to be led by the business outcomes and think about what we want the data, what the data needs to do.
I mean, there's no sadder thing than having looking at the data and not understanding what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. So
yes, you're absolutely right. If there's a company that's in its growth phase, mostly focused about retention, well then that's an important thing to know, that you want to increase your retention. You want to keep it above your churn rate at around 95%, versus you're in a growth phase where all you need to do is grab new markets. So there's a very, very different way of approaching it. But the main thing is that, so nothing has changed there. If you can't measure it, you don't do it.
Yeah, sure.
Nothing has changed.
Yeah, no, it's just that I see I see and hear there's a lot of people talking about data and analytics and all that sort of stuff, and I think there's the tools and the technology and the skills that people have, I think, are wonderful. We can do some wonderful things, but I sometimes think we should start talking less about the data and more about the outcomes. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, we see it from the adoption rates from systems already there. Even Salesforce automation systems today are not adopted really the right way, because what is it to be, what is the strategy there? What is what are we trying to achieve with such a system, and how should it be used? So yeah. I agree, technology is nothing without the people process, and specifically any company needs to know their main battles. What are the main 3 things that we need to win, and then tie the projects around that. It's not that I'm recommending going and looking at your data for fun, like a Lego set. It's more, if you want to do personalization and you have got your marketing objectives set by a strategy in a company, then you will need to have a data layer that functions.
Oh, no, absolutely. But I think it's like, some people it seemed to me, I hear talk of people talking about, data farms and data warehouses and even data lakes and things. And I'm thinking, oh, my word. I'm going to get.
I haven't heard the last one.
Yeah, I know. Data. You not heard data lakes before?
No, I haven't. I must say, it's probably embarrassing, but there you go.
Yeah, well, no. It's just I just think. Well, I hear about all these things and I think I'm either going to get lost or drown or get run over by something. It just feels like it's this massive thing. But like you said before, it's, be focused, start small, go from there. And then you can, because you learn the early principles about sort of what you need to organize and how you need to organize, and then you can grow from there. Otherwise, you end up trying to boil the ocean.
You gotta choose something. It might be so simple as the Winnipeg solution, which, if they're listening to this, was not simple, of course, but it's simpler than doing the whole CX on a company. Or it might be, how do I create a personalized newsletter that every single person I send out to on my list of 20,000, it's all personalized.
Yes.
Because that will increase your engagement and your opt-outs in a way you would never know you could. And some of our customers are doing that. Or we have a bank that does personalized homepage. How great would it be to come to a bank and you don't get offered all the stuff you have, like a car loan or stuff you don't need, but it's only relevant to you. So, I mean, you could easily start small and from there start to expand. As long as you have goals like, I want to increase engagement above X%, or I want to, decrease my opt-ins with a personalized newsletter. So you just have to set up some goals and just start experimenting.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So here's a couple of questions I have for you to wrap this up. So, as you know, I've recently written a book called How to Wow, but I'd like to ask you two things about that. And the first one is, what is Wow service or Wow experience to you?
I could be cheeky and say, if anybody from a large corporation calls me back as promised,
okay.
And that tells you a little bit about, what I think human beings, you don't need to do much, but you do need to do a little.
Yeah.
And, in this day and age where there's so many call centers, so many robots answering the phone, it's enough to drive any sane man or woman crazy. So that alone, but seriously, my view on it has always been, and that's not because I'm in a personalization company, but you gotta know the customer.
Sure.
That's just how it is. Otherwise, how can it'll become a so what experience.
Sure.
And you don't get word of mouth marketing for that. I stay at a hotel in Oslo since I travel there a lot these days. They give me the same room 609. The temperature room is always 19 degrees. I've asked them because sometimes it was so hot in the winter. And they always do that. We laugh about it. They know the things I like. Small things like that makes me happy and gives me a little bit, And then the other day, in fact, I got an email from a company that opted me out. And they said, hey, you've been inactive and not really responding to anything, so we're opting you out. That, from a marketing point of view, that was actually a wow moment for me, that they dare do that, and I actually opted back in, and now they have me more as an active user. So it's not so much I view it as a tactic. I just view it as, if that's their culture, I think that they will do well.
Excellent. And so the follow-up thing to that is, like, so if there's a general recommendation or a piece of advice you give to firms to help them get closer to being able to deliver their WOW service or their WOW experience, what would the one thing, if you were to recommend firms to do one thing, what do you think what would it be?
Know your audience as deep as you possibly can.
Fantastic. And so that brings me to my final question, which I always ask, and it's this. So, Jan, is there anything that you would like to shamelessly plug?
Yeah, if you're looking to invest in data management or personalization platform, call us at Cxense. It's spelled Cxense. It's a bit hard to spell, but you can find it on YouTube, how you pronounce it.
Fantastic. Well, I'll make sure that I will get all that kind of edited up and linked up and give you a big shout out at Cxense and things. But Jan, thanks for making the time to talk to me today and sharing the your sort of experience and the knowledge. It's good to talk to you again. Welcome back on the podcast. But once again, thank you for your time today.
No, thanks a lot. It's been my pleasure. Have a great day, Adrian.